Lonely rancher saved a giant native tied to a tree and felt his heart beat strong. Before we dive into the story, don't forget to subscribe and like the video and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. The canyon narrowed around me, sandstone walls rising like a cathedral carved by time. My horse, Dusty, moved at a steady trot, hooves clinking against stone. It had been 3 days since I'd seen another soul, and I'd almost convinced myself I preferred it that way. Solitude was safer, cleaner. No ties, no debts, no grief. But the West has a way of proving a man wrong when he least expects it. At first, I thought it was the cry of a bird carried on the wind. Then I realized it was something deeper, flesh struggling against rope, the faint rasp of breath forced through clenched teeth. I reined in hard, eyes scanning the shadows until I saw her. She was bound to an old cottonwood, wrists pulled high enough that the bark had cut into her skin. The woman stood taller than anyone I had ever laid eyes on, even bowed by captivity, her head nearly level with the branches. Her dress, woven in Lakota patterns of red and blue, was torn, stained with dirt and blood. But it wasn't the injuries that held me frozen in the saddle. It was her eyes. Dark, steady, unbroken, burning with a defiance I hadn't seen in years. 3 horses were tied nearby. Their riders had left them, which meant they couldn't be far. The echo of laughter drifted faintly from somewhere ahead in the rocks. Whoever had done this was close, and they'd be back soon. I should have kept riding. That's what Ethan Cross did, kept moving, never lingered. The sound of another's pain should have meant nothing to me. But looking at her there, proud even in suffering, I felt something stir I thought long buried. I swung down from the saddle, boots crunching on gravel. My hand rested on the knife at my belt. "Easy," I said, voice low as I stepped toward her. "I'm not here to hurt you." Up close, she was even more striking. Tall enough that most men would have had to tilt their heads back to meet her gaze. The stories of giants from childhood legends seemed suddenly less like fables. Yet her presence wasn't monstrous. It was majestic. When our eyes met, the canyon seemed to fall silent. For the first time in 34 years, my heart skipped like a boy's. "Who tied you here?" I asked, sliding the blade against the thick rope that bit into her wrists. She studied me as if weighing the truth of my words before answering. "Men who will return soon," she said. Her English carried the cadence of another tongue, each word deliberate. "You should leave, stranger, before they find you standing here." "I'm not going anywhere," I told her, and it surprised me to realize I meant it. Somewhere deep inside, a verse my mother once read to me stirred. "The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it." John 1:5. Looking into her eyes, I wondered if perhaps the Lord had placed this woman in my path for a reason. The last strand of rope snapped beneath my knife. She pulled her hands free, rubbing at the angry red mark circling her wrists. Though her skin bore cuts and bruises, she carried herself like a warrior who had endured worse. "You've got a name?" I asked. "Naomi Tall Feather," she replied, her voice firm despite her weariness. "And you?" "Ethan Cross." Her lips curved, not quite a smile, but something close. "Then, Ethan Cross, you are either very brave or very foolish." "Probably both," I admitted. The faint echo of voices grew louder now, bouncing between the canyon walls. Laughter, curses, the clink of spurs on stone. My instincts screamed at me. We had minutes at best. "You know how to use one of these?" I asked, drawing my spare Colt revolver from the saddlebag. Her answer came without hesitation. She opened the cylinder, checked it, and snapped it shut with the ease of a soldier. "My father taught me to shoot before I could read." That told me more about Naomi Tall Feather than any introduction. I whistled low, and Dusty trotted forward, ears twitching at the tension in the air. He was a tall Mustang, 16 hands, strong enough to carry two. Still, as Naomi approached, I wondered if even he would struggle under her towering frame. She proved me wrong. With a single graceful motion, she vaulted onto the horse's back, settling behind the saddle as though she'd been born in that place. "Impressive," I muttered, hauling myself up in front of her. "My people have ridden since long before your people crossed the oceans," she said simply. Her arms came around my waist as I spurred Dusty forward, and the warmth of her presence struck me harder than the cold wind rushing down the canyon. Behind us, shouts rose as her captors returned to find the tree empty. A gunshot cracked, the bullet whining off the rocks. Dusty lunged forward, muscles straining as I guided him toward the high ridges. "Who are they?" I called over my shoulder. Naomi's voice was tight but steady. "Silas McGraw's men. They've been hunting me for 3 days." "What for?" "Because I saw what I was not meant to see." The words hung heavy between us, lost for a moment beneath the pounding of hooves and the rush of wind. Another shot rang out, this one closer. Naomi's grip tightened around me, but there was no fear in it, only resolve. We reached a narrow ledge, Dusty leaping sure-footed where lesser horses might falter. I risked a glance back. 3 riders burst from the shadows, hard-faced men with eyes that belonged to predators. Naomi pointed ahead. "There, boulders half a mile on, caves in the rock, we can lose them." I didn't question her. Something about her tone made me believe she knew these canyons better than I ever would. As Dusty surged toward the rocks, I realized something I hadn't expected. I wasn't just running for survival. I was running with purpose. For the first time in years, I had someone to protect. To continue this adventure, please subscribe to our channel. It helps us keep creating. The cave swallowed us in shadow, its stone walls cool after the burning canyon. Dusty's breath steamed faintly in the air as he settled near the entrance, ears flicking at every distant echo. I led Naomi deeper until we found a hollow just wide enough for the 2 of us. I struck a match, lit a small fire from scraps of dry wood, and the glow painted the rock with trembling gold. Naomi sat across from me, her long frame drawn up with quiet dignity despite the torn dress and bruises. She hadn't asked for food, or water, or even rest. She just stared into the flames as if gathering strength from them. "They were waiting," she said at last, voice low but clear. "Not for me, but for someone else. A buyer." The word tasted foul in the air. I leaned forward, unsure I'd heard right. "Buyer?" Her gaze lifted, steady and unflinching. "McGraw's men take people, women, children. They sell them like cattle. Some to mining camps, some to worse places. I saw them, Ethan, dozens tied like I was, helpless." The fire popped, sending sparks up the dark chimney of rock. My stomach tightened with a slow, simmering anger. I'd heard whispers of such things in the border towns, the kind of rumors men dismissed over whiskey because no one wanted to believe them. But looking at Naomi's eyes, I knew this was no rumor. "They came after you because you saw too much." "Yes," she flexed her fingers, still raw from the rope. "And because my brother once rode with them. They think I might know more than I do." I studied her, the way she sat tall even with shadows hiding the bruises. It stirred something I hadn't felt in years, a need to fight for someone other than myself. Her eyes flicked toward me. "And you, Ethan Cross, what kind of man risks his life for a woman tied to a tree?" The question hit harder than a bullet. I rubbed a hand over my face, feeling the stubble scratch my palm. I could have lied, said I was just passing through, said it was chance, but her stare deserved better than lies. "I wasn't always the man you see," I said. The firelight caught the worn leather of the gun belt at my hip. "There was a time I hired out these pistols to whoever could pay. Mining bosses, cattle barons, sometimes worse. I thought drifting made me free. but mostly it just made me dangerous. Naomi's expression didn't change, but her silence pressed me harder than any rebuke. "And now?" she asked. "Now." My throat tightened. I glanced at the Bible tucked in my saddlebag, edges worn from years of dust and neglect. My mother's gift, carried but never opened. Now I'm trying to be something different. But men don't escape their past so easy. For a long moment, only the crackle of fire answered. Then Naomi leaned forward, her eyes glinting. "Maybe your past brought you here, Ethan Cross, to cut my ropes, to see what McGraw is doing. Maybe you were meant to stand against him." Her words carried a weight I couldn't shake, as if they were more than opinion, as if they were truth. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying faint hoofbeats along the canyon rim. Danger still hunted us. But here, in the quiet heart of the cave, another truth was taking root. This fight wasn't just Naomi's anymore. The fire burned low, its embers pulsing like a heartbeat in the dark. Naomi had stretched out against the cave wall, her long shadow flickering across the stone. I sat a few feet away, restless, turning over her words about Silas McGraw. The name itself felt like a curse. My hand drifted to the saddlebag. I hesitated before pulling it open. The small leather Bible slid into my palm, its cover cracked, edges browned from years of dust. I hadn't opened it since my mother died. For too long, it had been nothing more than a relic I couldn't part with. I turned it over slowly, the weight of it heavier than any revolver I'd carried. My thumb brushed across my mother's handwriting on the inside cover. For Ethan, that he might always find his way home. Naomi stirred, watching me with quiet interest. "That book," she said softly, "I've seen many white men carry it. Few seem to live by it." Her words held no mockery, only observation. I opened the book, pages thin and fragile, the smell of old paper mingling with smoke. My eyes fell on a passage I didn't expect, one my mother used to read when storms rattled the roof of our cabin. I read aloud, my voice rough with disuse. "Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me." Psalm 23:4. The words hung in the cave like a steady lantern against the dark. For years I'd scoffed at them. Tonight, with McGraw's men scouring the canyon, they struck deeper. Naomi's gaze softened. She touched the necklace of beads around her neck, each piece carved with care. "Among my people," she said, "we pray to the Creator with songs and smoke. We face the four directions, so none of the world is forgotten. When I was a child, I believed the sky heard me." "And now?" I asked. Her lips curved faintly, though sadness lingered in her eyes. "Now I still pray. Sometimes to the Great Spirit, sometimes to the God my cousin Rachel speaks of. I think they may be the same." I studied her across the firelight, a Lakota woman bound by heritage and loss, yet willing to bridge two worlds. She didn't mock my Bible, nor did she hide from her own faith. Instead, she wove them together, as if truth could be carried by more than one tongue. "You think he listens?" I asked, my voice quieter than the crackle of flame. "I think," she said, looking up toward the cracks in the cave roof where starlight filtered in, "that he sent you when I had no hope left." Her words pressed into me harder than any sermon. For years I'd lived as if drifting were freedom. Yet here, in this cave, I felt chained to something stronger, a purpose I hadn't chosen but couldn't deny. The hoofbeats outside faded into silence. Perhaps McGraw's men had lost our trail, for now, but the reprieve only deepened the urgency.
Evil wasn't miles away. It was close, breathing down our necks. Naomi leaned her head back against the stone, her voice barely above a whisper. "We cannot run forever, Ethan Cross. Sooner or later, we must stand." The verse echoed again in my mind, steady as my mother's voice. "I will fear no evil, for you are with me." For the first time in years, I wondered if it might be true. By mid-morning, the canyon had given way to rolling hills, green despite the dry season. Naomi rode beside me now, her posture straight even after the hard night. We hadn't spoken much since leaving the cave, but the silence felt less like distance and more like understanding. Ahead, the land dipped into a wide valley.
A cluster of wooden buildings nestled around a spring-fed creek, smoke curling from chimneys, voices faint on the breeze. Hidden Creek, small enough to vanish from a map, alive enough to be called home. Dusty carried us down the slope, hooves crunching on gravel. A few ranch hands paused at their work, eyes following us with guarded curiosity. Naomi, tall as legend on horseback, drew every gaze. Some stared openly, others pretended not to. Out here, difference was noticed, whether welcome or not. We stopped at a ranch house on the edge of town, larger than the rest, its porch shaded by climbing vines. Before we could dismount, the front door burst open. "Naomi!" The cry came from a woman shorter by a head, her dress a mix of settler cloth and Lakota beadwork. Rachel ran across the yard, skirts flying, her face bright with relief. Naomi swung down, and the two women embraced fiercely, their words flowing in Lakota. Though I couldn't understand, I felt the weight of reunion, the kind that comes after too much fear, too many nights of wondering if the other still breathed. I busied myself with Dusty, giving them their moment. When I glanced back, I caught Rachel's eyes, wet with both joy and anger. She switched to English. "We heard about the raid. I feared—" Her voice broke. "I am here," Naomi said simply, though her hand lingered on her cousin's arm as if anchoring herself to the truth. A tall man approached from the barn, sleeves rolled to the elbow, his gait steady with the ease of someone used to command. His eyes swept over me, then fixed on Naomi with a mixture of welcome and concern. "Thomas Burke," Naomi introduced, "my cousin's husband, and this is Ethan Cross, who cut me free." Thomas extended a calloused hand. His grip was firm, his gaze sharper than his voice. "Any man who stands against Silas McGraw has a place here. Come inside." The ranch house smelled of fresh bread and wood smoke. Sunlight slanted through small windows, catching on polished shelves and the faint gleam of a Bible resting open on the table. Rachel poured coffee while Thomas set out food, simple fare, but enough to make my stomach remember how long it had been since I'd eaten properly. Through the open window, the sound of a bell carried from the heart of town. It tolled noon, but its echo held something deeper, memory of Sundays long past, of hymns sung in rough chapels where hope was scarce yet stubborn. Naomi's shoulders eased slightly as she sat between her kin. For the first time since I'd met her, I saw her guard falter. Here, in this little valley, she was not just a fugitive, she was family. I sipped the strong coffee, listening to the bell fade into quiet. Hidden Creek was a fragile thing, peaceful but ringed by danger. For Naomi, it was sanctuary. For me, it was a glimpse of a life I'd long forgotten could exist. We gathered around the heavy oak table in Thomas Burke's kitchen, its surface scarred from years of meals, tools, and maps spread across it. The open Bible lay to one side, its pages ruffled by the faint summer breeze drifting through the window. Thomas unrolled a weathered map, pinning its corners with mugs and a tin lantern. His finger traced the mountains north of us, stopping at a narrow notch labeled in faded script, "Devil's Pass." "The Johnson wagon train is due through here in 6 days," he said. 47 wagons, near 200 souls, all carrying everything they own. Families bound for California. "McGraw knows it. That pass is the only trail wide enough for loaded wagons." Naomi leaned forward, eyes narrowing as she studied the lines of the terrain. One way in, one way out. High walls on both sides. A trap. "Exactly." Thomas's jaw tightened. "If McGraw positions his men there, those families won't stand a chance. He won't just rob them, he'll destroy them." Rachel clutched the edge of the table, her knuckles white. "We can't let that happen. Children ride in those wagons, Ethan. Infants, people who can't fight back." I stared at the map, the jagged lines and inked trails blurring into memory. Too many times I'd ridden with men who saw wagon trains not as families, but as walking banks. The thought of McGraw's gang descending on them churned my gut. "Can we warn them off?" I asked. Thomas shook his head. "The other trails are worse, steeper, longer, no water. Families would die on those roads before they ever reached safety. Devil's Pass is the only way." Naomi's hand rested on the map. "Then we must take the fight to McGraw, not wait for him to strike." The room fell silent. Even the ticking of the clock on the mantel seemed loud. Rachel glanced at me, her eyes questioning. "Ethan?" I breathed out slow. I'd told myself I was done fighting other people's wars, done carrying guns for causes that weren't mine. But those wagons carried lives. And Naomi's steady gaze reminded me this was no longer just her fight. "If we're going to stop him," I said, "we need more than courage. We need someone who knows McGraw's camp, his men, his weaknesses." Naomi's expression hardened. "There is one." Thomas raised a brow. "Who?" "Caleb Harlan," she replied. "He rode with McGraw once. He was Joseph's friend." Her voice caught slightly at her brother's name, but she pressed on. "If anyone knows how McGraw thinks, it's him." Rachel frowned. "That man's been hiding in the hills since he left the gang. Some say he's trying to live straight, others that he's just waiting until McGraw forgives him." Naomi shook her head. "No, Caleb owes Joseph his life. He will help us." Thomas folded his arms. "Then you'd better be right, because if he won't, those wagons are as good as lost." The lantern flame flickered, shadows bending across the map. Devil's Pass loomed larger than ink and paper now. It was a deadline carved into stone, 6 days away, and with every hour we wasted, 200 lives drew closer to ruin. The ride to Caleb Harlan's cabin took us through rough country where pines clung stubbornly to the slopes and the air smelled of resin and stone. Naomi guided the way, saying little. Her silence wasn't cold. It was the silence of someone carrying memories too heavy to spill with idle talk. By late afternoon, we spotted a thin ribbon of smoke rising beyond a ridge. Naomi pointed with her chin. "That will be him." We approached carefully. A man who'd once lived by the gun wouldn't welcome strangers without suspicion. Sure enough, before we were within 100 yards, a sharp voice rang out from the trees. "That's far enough. State your business." Naomi sat tall in the saddle, her voice carrying steady. "It's Naomi Tallfeather, Joseph's sister." A long pause. Then footsteps broke from the underbrush. A man emerged, lean, sharp-eyed, with the cautious gait of someone always measuring the ground beneath him. His hair and beard were peppered with gray, though he couldn't have been more than 40. "Naomi," he breathed, and something raw flickered across his face. "I heard about Joseph. I'm sorry I wasn't there." "You couldn't have stopped it," she said, though her jaw clenched at the memory. "But you can help stop what McGraw is doing now." Caleb's gaze shifted to me, sizing me up. "And who's this?" "Ethan Cross," I said, keeping my hands visible, away from the Colt at my side. Recognition flickered. "The gunman who cleaned out the Dalton brothers in Abilene. That was years ago, but I remember the name." I gave a shrug. "I'm trying to be something different now." Caleb snorted, though not unkindly. "Different don't come easy." He turned back to Naomi, eyes shadowed. "Why come to me?"
"Because you knew Joseph better than anyone," she said, "and because McGraw listens to no one but greed and fear. If we're to stop him, we need someone who knows his habits, his camp, his weaknesses." Caleb's jaw worked. He looked older than his years, weariness carved deep. "I spent 2 years under McGraw's thumb, long enough to know he doesn't forgive men who walk away. If he finds me, he'll kill me slow." "Then help us find him first," Naomi pressed. His eyes clouded. He turned, walking back toward his cabin, and for a moment I thought he'd send us away. But he paused on the porch, resting a hand on the railing as if steadying himself against ghosts. "Joseph saved my life twice," he said finally, his voice thick. "And I wasn't there to save his. That death's been gnawing me ever since." He turned, meeting Naomi's eyes. "I'll help, but you need to understand, going after McGraw head-on is suicide." Naomi's reply was steady. "So is doing nothing." Caleb studied her for a long moment, then nodded once, sharp as a blade drawn. "All right, if we're going to do this, we do it smart, and we do it soon. Because if McGraw truly means to strike that wagon train, the clock's already ticking." The words settled over us like a tolling bell. 6 days had never felt so short. Caleb's cabin was small, built from rough-hewn logs, the kind of place a man could vanish into if he wanted the world to forget him. We sat around his table, the air thick with wood smoke and unspoken dread. Caleb laid out a rough sketch of Dead Horse Canyon, lines carved into the wood with a knife point. "McGraw keeps his main camp here," he said, stabbing the map with the blade. "About 30 men total, though not all at once. He trusts nobody, which is why he surrounds himself with cutthroats. 3 sentries, 1 at the mouth of the canyon, 2 on the rim. They're watching for marshals, not old ghosts like me." "And we walk in how?" I asked. Caleb's eyes shifted to Naomi, then back to me. "The only way McGraw lets anyone close is if he believes he's got the upper hand. If he thinks I've captured Joseph's sister." My gut twisted before he finished. "No." Naomi's gaze didn't waver. "Yes, it is the only way." "Naomi." She cut me off with a lift of her hand. "Ethan, listen. McGraw has hunted me for days because he thinks I carry Joseph's secrets. If I'm brought before him, he'll want to keep me alive long enough to gloat, to demand answers. That buys time. Time for Caleb to gather intelligence. Time for you to strike if need be." I looked between them, anger building with the fire in my chest. "You're asking me to watch while you walk into the wolf's den with your hands tied?" Naomi leaned forward, her dark eyes locking onto mine. "I am not asking. I am telling you this is the best chance to stop him. For those families, for the children."
For Joseph. The name struck like a hammer. I thought of the wagons Thomas had described, babies bundled in quilts, women clutching what little they owned, men with tired eyes praying they could protect their kin. If we failed, they would be slaughtered. Caleb poured a measure of whiskey, his hand trembling just enough to betray him. McGraw's got a weakness for revenge. He hated Joseph, even as he needed him. If he thinks he can punish Joseph through Naomi, he won't kill her quick. That's our opening. The silence in the room pressed down like heavy stone. Naomi reached for the rope on the table, wrapping it loosely around her wrists, testing how it looked. The sight of it made my stomach clench. "You're too calm about this," I muttered. She met my gaze evenly. "Because fear wastes time, and time, Ethan, is what we don't have." I swallowed hard. The clock was ticking, 6 days until Devil's Pass ran red. Every instinct told me to fight this plan, to drag her out of this cabin and ride until McGraw was a shadow on the horizon. But deep down, I knew she was right. "Fine," I said at last, voice low, "but the moment it goes wrong, I'm coming for you."
no matter how many guns stand in my way." For the first time that night, Naomi smiled, faint, fierce, unshaken. "Then we are agreed. We go into the lion's den, and we come out alive." The fire snapped, sending sparks into the air. Outside, the night pressed close, the stars sharp as blades. The plan was set, and with it there was no turning back. The journey to explore the Wild West is still long. Subscribe to hear more true stories. If you're still watching, drop a 1 in the comments. Dawn broke cold and clear, the kind of morning where every sound carried sharp and far. Caleb tightened the ropes around Naomi's wrists. Not enough to bite, but enough to look convincing. She didn't flinch. Her chin lifted, proud even in disguise, as if daring the rising sun to witness what lay ahead. "You sure about this?" Caleb muttered, his voice low, roughened by guilt. Naomi gave a single nod. "If we hesitate, those families die." Her calmness unsettled me more than fear would have. I wanted to tear the ropes off her hands, to tell her we'd find another way. But there was no other way. This was the point of no return. I mounted up, riding with them until the canyon narrowed. Dusty's breath steamed in the crisp air as I drew him to a halt. Caleb and Naomi continued forward, their silhouettes stark against the pale light. "Ethan," Naomi said, turning her head slightly. Her eyes met mine across the distance. "No fear, only steady fire. Be ready." I swallowed the knot in my throat and spurred Dusty up a side trail that wound toward the canyon rim. The climb was steep, littered with shale that shifted under hoof, but Dusty was sure-footed. When we reached the top, I dismounted and crawled the last stretch on my belly, rifle slung across my back. From the ridge, I saw it all. Dead Horse Canyon opened like a scar in the earth, its floor dotted with crude shelters and cook fires. Horses stamped in a rough corral, their breath misting. I counted at least 20 men moving about, some sharpening knives, others checking rifles, all with the hard eyes of predators. And there he was. Silas McGraw stood near the largest tent, a man thick with age and muscle, his hair gone iron gray. Even at a distance, his presence bent the camp around him like a storm. He barked an order, and men scrambled to obey. Caleb rode into camp, Naomi bound behind him. Heads turned. Work stopped. McGraw himself looked up, and a grin split his weathered face. He stepped forward, boots crunching on gravel. "Well, I'll be damned," I heard faintly, carried by the canyon's echo. "Joseph's sister, gift-wrapped and delivered by a ghost." Laughter rippled through the camp, ugly and eager. Naomi sat tall, her wrists tied, but her eyes fixed on McGraw without a flicker of fear. I settled behind a boulder, rifle resting across the stone. My finger brushed the trigger guard. From here I had a clean line of sight to McGraw, but the time wasn't right. If I fired now, Caleb and Naomi would be dead before the smoke cleared. So I waited, heart hammering, every muscle taut as a drawn bowstring. Below me, the game had begun. The camp closed in around them like vultures circling fresh kill. Caleb dismounted first, raising his hands to show he carried no threat. Naomi slid down behind him, the ropes at her wrists swaying as though binding a prize. Silas McGraw strode forward, each step heavy with command. Up close, I could see the scars that lined his jaw, the cruel twist of his mouth. He was the kind of man whose shadow felt larger than his body. "Joseph's sister," he drawled, savoring each word. "Thought you could run forever? Thought the mountains would hide you?" Naomi stood tall despite the ropes, her chin lifting. I thought evil men would eventually choke on their own filth. The camp roared with laughter.
McGraw's eyes narrowed, but his grin lingered. "You've got fire. I'll enjoy breaking it." He turned to Caleb, his voice sharp. "And you, Harlan, I figured you'd run so far we'd never smell your coward's hide again. What changed?" Caleb's mouth worked, but his answer came steady enough. "A debt. Joseph saved me more times than I can count. I thought bringing his sister might balance the scales." McGraw studied him, suspicion flashing in those cold eyes. For a moment, I thought Caleb's mask would crack. But McGraw only chuckled, low and mean. "Maybe you finally remembered where your bread's buttered." He gestured sharply, and two men stepped forward. "Take her," he ordered. "Not with him, with me." The knot in my stomach twisted hard. Two brutes seized Naomi by the arms, dragging her toward McGraw's tent. She didn't struggle, didn't give them the satisfaction.
Her gaze flicked upward once, toward the canyon rim, toward me. Just for a heartbeat, but enough to remind me she knew I was there. Caleb shifted on his feet, his hand brushing the butt of his revolver before he thought better of it. McGraw noticed. His smile cooled. "You'll get your reward later, Harlan. For now, you stay out here, unless you want me to start asking questions you don't want to answer." Laughter rose again, mean and hungry. Naomi disappeared into the shadows of the tent, her tall figure swallowed by canvas and smoke. Caleb was left standing in the open, his jaw tight, sweat glistening at his temple. From my vantage above, every instinct screamed at me to act. My finger curled tighter around the trigger, lining McGraw's chest in my sights. One squeeze, and it would all be over. But not yet. If I fired too soon, Naomi would die in the chaos. Caleb, too. No, this was her fight as much as mine. My role, for now, was patience. The hardest role of all. Below, Silas McGraw disappeared into the tent where Naomi waited. The air in the canyon felt suddenly heavier, as if the rocks themselves were holding their breath. So was I.
The camp buzzed with restless energy, like hornets stirred from their nest. Men hauled crates, saddled horses, strapped rifles across their backs. The sound of hammers, curses, and boots against gravel rose in a feverish rhythm. Through my scope, I caught sight of McGraw stepping out of his tent. His face was tight, meaner than before, and Naomi walked just behind him, her wrists still bound. She looked untouched but tense, her gaze locked ahead, jaw set like stone. "Change of plans," McGraw barked, his voice carrying across the canyon. "We ride within the hour. Johnson's wagons won't wait, and neither will we. Load up everything worth carrying, burn what's left." The gang cheered, a sound that twisted my gut. I'd thought we had days. We had hours. Caleb stood near the corral, fists clenched at his sides. He was trying to look calm, but I could see the strain in his posture. McGraw's men gave him sidelong glances, suspicion brewing. One of them, a lean man with a scar cutting down his cheek, approached Caleb with a smirk. "Funny, ain't it? You vanish for months, then show up just in time with McGraw's prize." Caleb forced a laugh, but it came hollow. "Guess fortune favors me." The man's smirk widened, but his eyes hardened. "Or maybe it's too good to be true." His hand drifted toward his revolver. From my perch, I swore under my breath. Caleb was seconds from being exposed. Naomi caught it too. For the briefest moment, her eyes flicked toward Caleb, then away, as if warning him to hold steady. The small exchange wasn't lost on McGraw. His gaze snapped between them, suspicion kindling like dry tinder. "Bring Harlan to me," McGraw ordered suddenly. "I'd like to hear more about this debt he thinks he's paying." Two men stepped forward, hands already on their pistols. Caleb's cover was crumbling fast. I tightened my grip on the rifle, crosshairs tracing the scene.
If McGraw pressed too hard, Caleb would break, and Naomi would be the first to pay the price. Down below, Naomi's voice cut through the chaos. Calm, steady, deliberate. "You're wasting time, Silas. The wagons are moving west every mile we stand here. If you want them, you'll have to leave now." The gang froze at her boldness. Even McGraw paused, his suspicion wrestling with greed. For a heartbeat, I thought she might sway him. But then he laughed, low and cruel.
"You've got your brother's fire. Pity it didn't save him." His eyes turned back to Caleb, sharp as a blade. "Tie him. We'll see how loyal he really is when the fire's at his heels." Caleb stiffened, reaching instinctively for his gun. That was the moment I knew. We had no more time. If I didn't act now, Naomi and Caleb would both die before the sun set. I exhaled, slow and steady, finger brushing the trigger. The valley of decision had come. The crosshairs steadied on the scar-faced outlaw reaching for Caleb's gun. My breath slowed, the world narrowing to a heartbeat and a trigger pull. The shot cracked like thunder. The man spun and dropped, his revolver clattering uselessly to the dirt. For half a second, the camp froze. Then chaos exploded. Shouts rose sharp and panicked. Men scrambled for cover, rifles snatched up, boots pounding as horses screamed in their pens. McGraw bellowed orders, his voice cutting through the din like a whip. I chambered another round and fired again. A sentry on the canyon rim pitched forward, tumbling from the rocks. My rifle bucked, smoke curling in the cold air, and still I worked the lever, shot after shot.
Below, Caleb wrenched free of the men trying to seize him. He swung a fist into one outlaw's jaw, then drew his revolver and fired point blank. Dust burst around his boots as bullets snapped the ground, but he ducked behind a wagon, his pistol barking fire. Naomi, dragged to the center of camp, twisted suddenly. Her bound wrists snapped free, Caleb's careful knots giving way as planned. She drove her elbow into her captor's gut, seized his dropped revolver, and fired in one fluid motion. The second captor crumpled, clutching his chest. For the first time since entering the camp, she stood armed and unbound, her tall frame cutting through the smoke like a figure out of prophecy. I shifted aim, picking targets where the press was thickest. Each shot scattered more men, forcing them down, buying Naomi and Caleb seconds they couldn't spare. McGraw roared, rallying his gang. "Find that rifleman! Drive him from the rocks!" Several men scrambled for the canyon rim, firing wildly at my perch. Shards of stone stung my cheek as bullets cracked overhead. I ducked low, reloading, the smell of powder sharp in my lungs. Through the dust and noise, I caught sight of Naomi.
She moved with purpose, not desperation, low, fast, sliding into the shelter of a supply crate. Her revolver snapped in her hands, each shot deliberate, each outlaw falling back. Caleb, bleeding from a graze at his shoulder, fought to join her. They met behind the wagon, exchanging a look that spoke more than words. Still alive, still together, still fighting. But McGraw was moving too. He shoved men aside, his revolver already drawn, his eyes fixed on Naomi with a predator's hunger. My rifle was nearly empty. I reloaded as fast as my hands allowed, every second precious. Below, McGraw advanced like a storm, shouting curses, promising blood. The balance hung by a thread. One more shot, I thought, steadying my aim on the man who had cast shadows over too many lives. One more shot to tip the scales. McGraw barreled through the smoke and dust, a force of fury in human form. His revolver cracked once, twice, bullets tearing splinters from the wagon Naomi crouched behind. She rolled clear, her tall frame moving with desperate precision, and fired back.
The shot went wide, grazing his coat, but not slowing him. I lined him in my sights, but Caleb stumbled into view, wrestling another outlaw. I couldn't risk the shot. My rifle trembled in my hands as I whispered, "Lord, guide us now." Naomi and McGraw closed the distance in a heartbeat. His revolver swung up, but she was faster, slamming into him with all her weight. The gun went spinning across the dirt as the two of them crashed together in a tangle of limbs and fury. The fight turned savage, stripped of finesse. McGraw's fists hammered like iron, each blow meant to break, not bruise. Naomi gritted her teeth, blocking, striking back with elbows and knees. Dust rose around them, a cloud that blurred the edges of the camp. "Joseph screamed before he died," McGraw snarled, straining against her. "You'll scream louder." Naomi's eyes blazed. She drove her forehead into his nose, a crunch of bone and blood. He reeled but came back swinging, seizing her arm, twisting. She cried out as his knife flashed free. My gut clenched. I scrambled for a shot, but the dust and movement made it impossible. I could only watch, helpless, my soul knotted in dread. That was when the verse rose unbidden from memory, words my mother had made me memorize when I was a boy, clutching her worn Bible by lamplight. "Greater love hath no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends." John 15:13. The words steadied me. If it came to it, I would spend every drop of blood to give her a chance. My life had been wasted on shadows and drifting until now. Below, McGraw pressed the knife close, his teeth bared in triumph. Naomi twisted, her height and strength giving her leverage. She shoved hard, rolling them across the dirt. The knife carved air instead of flesh, missing by inches. She struck with everything left in her, a fist to his throat, a knee to his gut. He staggered, coughing, blood on his lips, but he wasn't finished. He surged back, larger, older, meaner, an animal unwilling to die. Naomi met him head-on. Her cry rang through the canyon, fierce as a war song, echoing against the stone. I whispered the verse again under my breath, my finger tightening on the trigger, waiting for the one clean chance that might save her. The battle had come down to this, her strength, his fury, and the mercy of God hanging over us both. The clash between Naomi and Silas churned up a storm of dust, their bodies locked in a brutal struggle. Every man in the camp had stopped to watch, drawn to the spectacle of strength against savagery. It was the kind of fight where only one would leave standing. Then came the sound. Hoofbeats, hard and fast, rolling like thunder through the canyon. I turned, scanning the rim. Riders poured over the crest. Thomas at the lead, his rifle raised, followed by half a dozen men from Hidden Creek. Behind them, more followed, farmers and ranch hands who had traded plows for guns in the name of justice. Their war cries split the sky as they charged straight into the camp. McGraw's men faltered, panic flashing across their faces. The tide turned in an instant. Where moments ago they had outnumbered us, now they were scattering, breaking like glass under hammer. Some fired back, others bolted for the horses, but the fight had gone out of them. I emptied my last rounds into the outlaws still holding ground, then slung my rifle and scrambled down the slope. Dust filled my throat, but I didn't stop. By the time my boots hit the canyon floor, the camp was a storm of gunfire, smoke, and men fleeing in every direction. But my eyes sought only two figures, Naomi and Silas. They still grappled in the heart of the chaos, locked in a circle no one dared to break. McGraw, bloodied and wild-eyed, slashed with his knife again, desperate. Naomi caught his wrist, twisted until the blade clattered to the dirt. "You think you can end me?" he spat, his face twisted with hate. "I built this land with blood. I'll take you down with me." Naomi's voice rang clear, a sound that silenced even the gunfire for a heartbeat.
"You've taken enough lives. You'll take no more." With one final surge, she drove her knee into his gut, ripping the last breath from his lungs. He staggered, doubled over, gasping like a beast brought low. She seized his fallen knife, turned it in her grip, and with a swift, practiced motion, ended the fight. Silas McGraw collapsed into the dust, his empire crumbling with him. The camp went quiet. Men dropped weapons, raised their hands, or fled into the wilderness. The thunder of battle faded, replaced by the crackle of fire and the whinny of frightened horses. I reached Naomi just as she stood over McGraw's body, her chest heaving, sweat and blood streaking her face. Her eyes found mine, fierce and unbroken. For a moment, all I could do was stare, struck by the sheer strength that radiated from her. Thomas rode up, dismounting quickly. "It's over," he said, scanning the wreckage. "By God Almighty, it's finally over." I glanced at Naomi. Her hand still trembled around the knife, but her voice was steady. "Not by luck, not by chance, by justice." And as the canyon filled with the smoke of a battle hard won, I whispered a prayer of thanks, for deliverance, for courage, and for the woman who had stood taller than every shadow that had ever haunted this land. If you like this video, please comment number 9. If you don't like it, please comment number 0. And please leave a comment and share your feelings. The canyon smelled of smoke and gunpowder, the sharp tang of battle still clinging to the air. Horses shifted nervously in the corral, eyes wide, while the wounded groaned where they lay among the wreckage. But for the first time in months, maybe years, the land itself felt lighter, as though the shadow of Silas McGraw had been lifted. Naomi stood with her shoulders squared, her tall frame towering above the men of Hidden Creek who gathered around her. Blood streaked her cheek, and her torn dress bore the marks of the struggle, but she looked more like a victor out of legend than a victim rescued. Thomas removed his hat and bowed his head, a gesture of deep respect. "You ended him," he said simply, "and with him the fear that's haunted these valleys too long." Naomi's gaze swept across the camp, taking in the frightened prisoners Silas had kept, the weapons piled high, the faces of men who no longer had a master to serve. Her voice carried quiet conviction. "I ended what he stood for. But justice doesn't rest in my hands alone. It rests in the Almighty's." Her words sank deep into me. I'd lived my life behind a gun, surviving from one day to the next. But today had been different. Today, I had fought not for myself, but for something greater. For her, for the families in danger, for a future where men like McGraw could no longer prey on the weak. I looked down at my hands, blackened with powder, trembling not from fear, but from the weight of what we'd done. My mother's worn Bible pressed against my chest inside my coat, the same one I'd carried for years without ever opening it except in loneliness. Now its words returned to me. "The Lord is my light and my salvation. Whom shall I fear?" The answer, standing here among friends, was no one. Caleb limped toward us, blood matting his sleeve where a bullet had grazed him. His face was pale but set with determination. "It's finished," he rasped. "McGraw's men are scattered. The wagon train will be safe." He met Naomi's eyes. Joseph would have been proud. Naomi reached for him, gripping his arm with fierce affection. "Joseph believed you could be more than the man McGraw tried to make you. Today, you proved him right." The camp began to stir with new purpose. Hidden Creek's riders rounded up the surviving outlaws, binding their hands, while others freed the prisoners Silas had kept hidden in a storage tent. Women and children stumbled into the light, their eyes wide with terror, until Naomi knelt among them. She spoke in Lakota to a young girl, her voice soft, her touch gentle, and the child clung to her like she had found a mother again. Thomas came to my side. "We'll bring them to Hidden Creek," he said. "Give them food, a roof, a chance to heal."
His eyes softened as he looked toward Naomi. "And you, both of you, should come too. A man can only wander so long before he needs a place to stand." I followed his gaze. Naomi turned her face toward the rising sun, its golden light painting the ridges of the canyon. For the first time since I'd met her, I saw not just fire in her eyes, but peace. I walked to her, dust crunching beneath my boots. And when she looked at me, the world narrowed to just us. "It's over," I said. My voice cracked, thick with all I could not put into words. She reached out, her hand resting on my chest where the Bible lay. "No, Ethan, it's beginning." Around us, the canyon slowly quieted. The cries of the wounded softened. The captives found comfort. The outlaws were disarmed. Life was stirring where death had ruled. And deep inside, I felt it too. A stirring, a calling I had long ignored. That the wandering, the violence, the loneliness, it had all led me here, to this woman, to this place, to this moment, to the chance at redemption. 3 months later, Hidden Creek bloomed with spring. The hills beyond the town were green with new grass, and wildflowers painted the meadows in strokes of gold and blue. The shadow of Silas McGraw had faded into memory, but his downfall had left behind something far greater than silence. It had sown unity. On a bright Sunday morning, the church bell rang out, clear and steady, calling the town together. People arrived in wagons, on horseback, and on foot, dressed in their best clothes. Ranchers who had once fought only for their own herds now stood shoulder to shoulder with Lakota families Naomi had invited. The benches filled, and still more stood outside the open doors, eager to witness what was about to take place. I stood at the front of the church, my hands rough, my heart unsteady in a way battle had never made it. Thomas clapped me on the shoulder with a grin. "You faced gunfire without blinking, Ethan. Don't tell me a woman's kiss has you shaken." He wasn't wrong. For all the fights I'd lived through, nothing had ever made me tremble like the thought of watching Naomi walk down that aisle. And then she did. Naomi entered, tall and radiant, wearing a dress Rachel had sewn with her own hands. It was unlike anything the town had seen. A blend of Lakota beadwork and settler fabric, white cotton trimmed with patterns in red and turquoise. A feather was braided into her dark hair, catching the sunlight like a crown. She moved with the same grace she had shown when vaulting onto a horse or standing unbroken in Silas's camp. But now she walked toward me with peace in her eyes. When she reached my side, the preacher raised his Bible. His voice carried above the quiet. "Love is patient, love is kind. It does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud. It always protects, always trusts, always hopes, always perseveres. Love never fails." The words of 1 Corinthians 13 wrapped around us, steady and eternal, like they had been written for this very moment. Naomi's hand found mine, her long fingers strong yet tender, and I knew the wandering had ended. "I now pronounce you husband and wife," the preacher said. "Ethan and Naomi Steele, joined before God." I kissed her then, and the room burst into laughter and applause. Because she was taller, I had to reach up, stretching until my boots left the floor for a moment. She pulled me closer, lifting me clean off the ground, and the congregation roared with joy. The celebration spilled into the streets. Fiddles played, children danced, and long tables were set with food from both ranch kitchens and Lakota fires. Fresh bread sat beside roasted venison. Cornbread shared space with berries and prairie roots. Voices rose in songs of praise, in English and Lakota, carried on the spring wind. Later, as the sun dipped low, Naomi and I slipped away to the porch of the small house Thomas had helped us build on the edge of his land. From there we could see the town, the cattle grazing beyond, and the mountains painted in crimson and gold. She leaned against me, her warmth steady at my side. "Do you regret it?" she asked softly. "Leaving the trail, laying down the gun?" I shook my head, my arms circling her waist. "The only thing I regret is not finding you sooner." She smiled, that fierce and beautiful smile that had first undone me back in the canyon. "My people say the heart knows its home before the mind understands the journey." I pressed a kiss to her temple. Then my heart knew, long before I did. As the first stars pierced the darkening sky, I whispered a prayer of thanks. Not for deliverance alone, but for love, for faith, and for the second chance I never thought I'd deserve. Hidden Creek sang with laughter behind us, but out here it was just the two of us, and the future we were ready to build, together, under the eyes of God. As the music of Hidden Creek faded into the night, I found myself thinking not only of Ethan and Naomi, but of all who came before us, pioneers, mothers, fathers, and children who carved lives from a wild land with faith as their anchor. Their courage, their struggles, their quiet acts of love echo still, reminding us that the past is not so far behind. Perhaps you, too, remember a time when family gathered close around the fire, when neighbors stood together through hardship, when hope was passed from one generation to the next like a lantern in the dark. Those memories, like this story, remind us that compassion and courage are never wasted. If this tale stirred something in your heart, I invite you to join us for more true Wild West stories, tales of grit, grace, and God's providence. Subscribe, share, and keep the spirit of the frontier alive.